So in one of the most, I suppose, yeah, one of the most significant aspects of Apptivo is just how configurable the system is. And in a lot of cases, that's a strength because it means that you can build really interesting automated workflows, really customized screens. But for some folks, that implies that it also is harder to use. And that may be concerning for some folks. And the reality is quite the opposite, right? So most CRMs are hard to use just because there's a lot of unnecessary lists and buttons and aspects of it that don't really work for you. And with Apptivo, the benefit is you can eliminate all of it and make sure that it's pretty streamlined and easy for your users to access the information they need to. And so that's what we're going to focus on for today's webinar, is just trying to identify certain strategies you can equip yourself with to make the process a lot easier for your team, if simplicity is the goal. In some cases, you want a really robust system that handles a lot of various aspects of your workflow. But sometimes it's just, you have pretty basic requirements and you just don't want to have a system that's overly complicated. And so that's what we'll be covering today. And if you've seen any conversation, any webinar in the past, we usually start with this slide, and it's usually something that we're pretty proud of, the fact that we have all these applications that you can utilize that are built in one ecosystem. But obviously, this is, when you're trying to avoid complexities, this is typically the first culprit you want to look at, because a lot of times users get really excited with all this additional functionality. They just add everything connected together. And then as soon as your end users start using it, it just is obviously pretty overwhelming. And so the one thing I would recommend if you are looking for simplicity is just identifying how to reduce the number of apps as much as possible. So for example, I've seen teams who use the project management tool to manage any requirements that come from the client. So if the client reaches out to them and says, hey, we need some additional support or help, they'll go in and create a project or maybe a case for, the help desk ticket. Sometimes it's much easier just to create a new task directly associated with that customer, right? You don't really need to have a project. Let's say that you just completed a sale and you have 3 things that you need to do. Maybe help them create a new account on your system, or just set them up on your other ERP database. And so there's maybe a few tasks that need to be done when the sale is closed, and you might be tempted to create a project after the opportunity just because that feature exists. But it may just be easier to create those tasks in the opportunity itself. As a matter of fact, the Opportunities app has a way to auto-generate tasks when you hit a certain stage. And so you can create those tasks pretty easily. So just, ignore this component of Apptivo for now. Just focus on the core CRM, customers, contacts, leads, and opportunities, and maybe 1 or 2 that are essential for you. And that'll, just improve your chances of making an easy to use system. Why prioritize simplicity? We've already kind of talked about this, and it's probably not a hard sell for anybody, but I think many people do underestimate the drastic effect it has on user adoption. So the first time someone uses a system pretty much determines their entire outlook on it, whether they think it's easy to use or not. And so having a system that's easy to use, that makes sense to them as soon as they log in, is super critical. And once you improve adoption, which is really the bottom line goal here, there's a lot of benefit that you'll see. Data, the records get updated more frequently, so you have improved accuracy in your data. Your team can collaborate way easier. Everyone's on the same page. So there's all these, really, really crucial aspects of having a system that's easy to use. So in today's conversation, we'll talk about a couple of things. Uh, and like previous conversations, we want to start by understanding how to plan ahead, what questions you want to ask before you actually go in and start setting up the system. We'll do a basic introduction to the configuration, just uh, the core aspects of what you can change in Apptivo and how they could be leveraged to make the system easy to use. Uh, and then we'll go in and actually look at how the system can be configured around a use case. Uh, and most of what we're going to be doing is really removing things and not adding them. So that's that's probably what we'll be focusing on. And then there's a lot of other tools and integrations built into Apptivo that are bound to make it easier for your team to use the system. And so we'll take a look at them. Some of them are quite often overlooked, so that'll be a pretty important part of this. And then the last thing we'll take a look at is just a brief overview of the user settings that you can configure and customize. So before we hop into the actual conversation, like the last time, I just want to ask a few basic questions just so I have an understanding of the audience here. So two questions. How many employees of your team need to use the CRM? Like, so how big is the team that you're hoping to implement the CRM for? And then what applications are you interested in using in Apptivo? So it looks like quite a few respondents are still pretty interested in project management despite me telling you not to use it. So um, most of what we're going to talk about is actually going to be relevant to project management and any other application actually. So so if you are still in need of those apps, that totally makes sense, and you'll hopefully be able to implement the same processes in those apps as well. Um, it looks like pretty much everyone is almost done voting. I'll give you another couple of seconds. But yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you for doing that. I almost always forget to do this, so just want to get that out of the way. Okay, so like in other webinars, we're going to be taking a look at a use case, and we'll keep this in mind throughout the process. And for today's conversation, we'll take a look at a manufacturing company that handles the construction, manufacturing, and maintenance of steel components for industrial equipment. So they just have really big projects, and it's not a volume game. It's really just a couple of projects per year. It's a small team. They don't have a sales team. In fact, they just have um, they just have um, just project managers who also are involved with creating RFPs. And so it was in this particular instance, it's really important to make sure the system's easy to use because the project managers aren't going to live inside of the CRM. Actually, before I go forward, there was one of the users asked why I said not to use project management, and I was partially joking. The reason I had said it may not be relevant is sometimes you can just create tasks directly tied to a customer or a contact. And so sometimes if it's just a set of loose tasks that you're using, you can just do it that way instead of creating a separate project. And that just is one little thing that could potentially make it easier. But obviously there are a ton of instances when you do have to use projects. Where, like, for example, you want to track time. Maybe there's quite a few tasks under milestones, and you need to track that. You need to track the timeline of executing that. So there's obviously benefits to that, but you want to use it only when you know that it's necessary. Okay, so going back to this use case, we just need to be able to track a pipeline for all the RFPs that this team is responding to. And we also need a place to just do some basic account management stuff, logging calls, adding notes, that sort of thing. And as I mentioned earlier, there isn't a core sales team, so there aren't people who are going to be living in the CRM, so it just needs to be as easy to use as possible. So the first thing we'll take a look at is planning ahead. What kind of questions do we ask before we even start with the implementation? And a really important one and a somewhat basic one is just what are some example workflows and activities that need to be managed? It's a pretty simple question, and you can answer it by just creating a simple flow diagram like this one. But you want to just detail what processes need to be supported in the system. And so in this case, all of the opportunities, the majority of the opportunities come through RFPs. And so I want to use the Opportunities app to manage this process. So the first thing is we would go into an online database and look for RFPs that are suitable to us. We'll do a quick screening of them and then add them to the first stage and create a new opportunity for them. And then after we filter the opportunity, we add it to the list, someone from the project management team can then assign that to themselves. And then they would submit it. And in some cases, hopefully we would be finalists for the RFP. And then you'd get to a closure, close one or close loss. So that's a pretty simple process. And when you're looking at planning around the oh, and I'm sorry, I should have explained this already, but an RFP is a request for proposal. So in engineering companies, quite often, the client will reach out to a bunch of vendors and say, hey, I need to build this project. And then quite a few vendors, at least, usually a minimum of 5 vendors, will submit some kind of a proposal, and then the client will choose from them. So that's sort of the process that we're going to be walking through here. After you detail these workflows, the next question you want to ask is what information needs to be gathered at each stage. So when you screen that initial request for proposal, you want to know what the submission timeline is. When is it due? Usually there's a document associated, so you want to have that easily accessible. And then as you move through the stages, there's some additional details that need to be tracked. So just list those things briefly. And then the last question you want to ask in relation to this is, at each stage, what follow-ups and reminders do you want to create? So in this scenario, there's no real place for a regular check-in. So for a lot of you though, once you have a first meeting with the client, there's a weekly check-in. So that may be something that you want to track as a follow-up at a certain stage. So just list those, and we'll talk about how these are actually implemented later. But for now, just go in and add. In our case, once we screen the opportunity, we want to make sure that somebody assigns it to themselves. So if no one makes any changes to an opportunity, we want to know that this opportunity needs to be assigned to somebody. And then after it's assigned, we want to send a notification to the project manager when you're coming up on the deadline, so that they just have a list of opportunities that they need to be on top of and prioritize. And then once it's submitted, we need to follow up with the customer a month later to check in to see if there was a decision. So yeah, just list any basic reminders and follow-ups at any stage. And these workflows and activities that you're creating, they don't have to be a process like this one. It could just be just simple activities. Like for account management, there's with these engineering clients, some of them have maintenance contracts, and I just need to be sure to check in with them once in a while to see how things are going. And so I need to track those check-ins. Any updates or meetings that I have with the client, I also need to be able to log. And sometimes existing clients will come back and ask for some additional services, so I need to have a way of supporting that. So these are the kinds of things that you want to be able to answer and just detail before you actually jump into the system. And I think of all the things that we're going to discuss, this is probably going to have the greatest impact on ease of use, is just direction. Another question that I would ask is, what are the type of users you're going to have apart from the administrators? And I really wouldn't have more than 2 or 3 other types. 3 types of users maximum. And a few questions you want to ask regarding this is, what's the first thing that they should see? So in our case, with these engineers, I don't want them to look at the pipeline or the revenue. They're not really interested in that sort of stuff. They just need to know what tasks are due on their plate and what opportunities they need to be responding to. So that's the first thing I want them to see. And then of all of the activities that we've been talking about, what need to be supported by each of the users? And so that's another thing you'd want to detail. And so we'll take a look at how this is all related. Okay. So now that we've answered a few questions, let's discuss just briefly what can be configured in Apptivo. And before I go any further, were there any questions that anyone had regarding the questions that we've been asking, or any of the items that we're about to look at? Anything that you want to prioritize? So I know that somebody had mentioned. Okay, so someone had asked about our REST API and if it would be possible to do a CRM import. We have some resources that we can certainly share with you to help with that. So I'll send that over to you. And someone also asked about having a recording of this and the PPT slides. I'll definitely be able to share that with you. So that shouldn't be an issue. Okay, let's go ahead and keep moving forward. Let's talk about what can be configured in Apptivo. There are really 4 main things. There's the master layout. So if you've entered the customer's app in Apptivo, I'll just say that it's pretty similar in every application. These 4 things you can do in any app. You can configure the layout, meaning all the fields that you're tracking for a certain record, so for a certain client. That can be configured. You can create your own attributes, remove stuff that isn't relevant. When you look at a table, you can configure the columns, of course. You can also change the different views, and a view in Apptivo is just a filtered list. So all of those can be configured, and you can also rename the application itself. So in our case, it may be useful to rename opportunities to RFPs. So that's something that we may take a look at. And customers, a lot of times I've noticed people have renamed customers to clients or companies or accounts just to match terminology that their team is familiar with from previous implementations. So these are the 4 things that we're going to try to configure to make things easier to use to start off. So let's hop into the system and take a look at this. Give me one quick second. So if you just signed up for an account and you logged into Apptivo, what you saw is probably something like this, right? You have your agenda, and a lot of folks downplay the importance of the agenda just because it looks empty when you start off with the system, but it actually brings a lot of things together. So every time you create a task for any opportunity or project or contact, you'll see those listed here. You'll see any follow-up reminders in your calendar on the top, and you'll have a calendar, of course, that shows you your appointments. And so it actually brings a lot of information together, and it gives you a pretty good idea of what you need to do for the day. So it could be pretty useful, but as I had mentioned earlier, sometimes it's unnecessary. So in the case of the engineers on my team, I want them to go straight to the opportunities and see what they what is relevant to them. So we'll talk about how to change the home page. The other thing that I would recommend changing as soon as you create a new account is this menu on the top. Whenever I go into accounts with clients, I notice that this is something that people typically ignore just because you can still access all the apps you need. But you want to make sure that the apps that you're most frequently going to use are visible on the top here. So to do that, you would click on the name on the top right corner, go to Preferences, click on Customize Home, and then and there's two different options for the menu. You can have this grid layout, or you can have it sort of as an actual menu. I would absolutely recommend the menu over the grid for sure every time. And then here on these drop downs, I would just pick the apps that you would be using most. So in this case, I really just need contacts, customers, opportunities, and maybe human resources, and maybe a drop down with all the CRM apps. So what you'll see is it just immediately allows you to access those apps pretty quickly. And so that's pretty handy. And you might be wondering, hey, there's all these other apps. Are you actually going to be using them? Well, no, I don't want to use projects in this case. I don't want to use items. So if you wanted to remove these applications, all you have to do is go to App Store on the top right corner. And here you can enable or disable any application. So items, for example, I don't need this, so I can remove it by just clicking there. I can go to project management, and I can remove that as well. So it's that simple. And then we'll go back to the home page to refresh the menu. And you'll notice that the rest of it is gone. So, okay, let's go to the customers app, and let's take a look at the various things that we can configure. So if I click on this client record, the sample that I created, and scroll down and review this, you'll notice that there's a lot of information in here. And I would say 75% of this is just not relevant to us. So this is the first thing that I'd want to configure. And this is the master layout. Now, these columns, they're relatively useful, but I don't really care about who created it. I don't need the Skype information. I don't care about the sales rep either. I'm more interested in their contact information, their address. I just want to make sure that those things are front and center. And so I definitely want to configure this table. And then I have a bunch of different views on the left, and most of these are just not necessary for me. Market, I don't care about that. Territory doesn't matter to me. Category doesn't either. Directory definitely doesn't. So a lot of this we're going to clear out as well. So the goal is whatever you see, and whatever you see that isn't relevant to you, you can remove. So just click on More and go to Settings. And then go to Customize App. And here you're going to have all the options available to you. You can rename the app. So maybe we want to call this Companies. And Master Layout. This is where you see the layout of all the fields for a client or company record. And so we're going to spend some time configuring this. And the way you want to prioritize this is the first section, any critical information needs to go straight into that. And don't be too concerned about losing data. Just remove it and if it's not necessary. I don't care about the customer ID. I don't really care about the status really in this client record. I don't need any of this. I'm not sending mass emails, so I don't care about unsubscribe bounces and stuff. So what I'll do is I'll move the phone and the email up, and I'll remove this section. And I noticed a few questions. Okay, a few of these are answered. So So yeah, you just move any critical information to the top and clear out as many sections as possible. So the address information can probably go up there. You don't need a separate section for that. And then we get to this massive one. And what do we do with all of this stuff, right? Um, well, some of this is actually pretty useful. So follow-up date, follow-up description, created by, created on, these date fields and these logs, they could potentially be useful. Maybe you want to know who last updated this account. So it's not critical. I don't know if it's necessary. If there's any fields like that that you're just not sure about, I would just scroll to the bottom. I don't need this, so I'll clear this. I'm going to create a new section and call it just system info or default data, whatever. It doesn't matter what you name this. And then I'll just move any fields that I'm not sure about or aren't immediately important, but could potentially be useful down the road. So follow-up date, follow-up description. So I'll just throw everything in there. And then this section, maybe I don't want my users to see it as soon as they log in to or click on an account. If you want that, if you click on this section and under default state, you can turn this to closed. And what that does is it just, when you click on an account, by default, it'll just be collapsed like that. So that could be useful just to make it look a little cleaner. And then the rest of this information just isn't necessary for me, so I'm going to delete the section. But if you are a user who actually needs to handle like a parent-child relationship between companies, maybe you work with Walmart, but you work with specific stores, and you have the head office, and then you have multiple regional locations. You may want to use the parent customer field. So that's what's going to help you link a child account to the parent. So in my case, I don't need it, so I'll just clear this whole thing. And you can see that just with a few clicks, we've made this just significantly cleaner. And so that's a really valuable thing to start off with. And as I mentioned, the most important information is up top, so I'd probably move the category and sales rep down and move the phone and email up. And that, I think, is a pretty good place. Now, after we remove all the information, now we go back and ask the question of, is there any information that we need to add to this layout? Well, if we go back to our plan, you'll know that for maintenance check-ins, we need to know when the contract for the maintenance contract is expiring, just so that I can create those follow-ups. And so that's a date field that you can pretty easily add. So I can go back into the layout. And if you want to add an attribute, you just find one from this list over here. Just drag it over, and you can rename it. So here, this is going to be the maintenance contract expiry. Okay, and then just make sure to click save, or else all our hard work is down the dump. Andrew, I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned a name, but someone had asked if there's some sections and fields that are mandatory and they can't be deleted. Can they be hidden somehow? That's a great question. So sales rep, for example, I don't care about the sales rep, right? But it's mandatory, which means I can't delete it. What I would recommend is just throw it into the section here. It's not a perfect solution, but the user isn't going to end up seeing it. So it's pretty handy. And in some instances, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. I think in some applications, I can't think of an example. Sometimes it's like a drop-down list or something that's mandatory, and you have to enter something in. And if it's a drop-down list that's mandatory, you can actually set a default value. So you can just, put some kind of value, make it the default value, and put that in this bottom section. That way, no one has to really go in, and no one is forced to enter in any information. It just works on the back end and you're good to go. So that's how I would handle some mandatory fields. Now, if you go back into the layout, you'll notice that the changes will reflect immediately, and it just looks immediate. It just looks pretty clean, right? So that's sort of how it will be handled. Another question that popped up is some contacts have an extension number associated with the phone number, and I don't know if you could. Yeah, I suppose you could just type it in here. It depends on if you're actually making a call from Apptivo. If you are, I'd probably create a new number field next to the phone number and just add the extension there. So I would just create a new number field, call it extension, and enter that in there. And that'll probably be the best way to do it. That'd be my recommendation. I may be getting that wrong, but if I think of a better way, I'll let you know. So now we've created this layout. Now let's talk about how to customize these columns. Firstly, before we do that, you'll notice that there's quite a few. If you click on this overview dropdown, there's a few default layouts that have been created. And some folks are actually tempted to change all of these. I would just recommend creating one default view and making sure that has all the information you need in it. So going to the settings and going to customize app, list layouts, and click web. And then you'll see those different presets that you've added. And here you can you can just focus on this overview table and just make sure to have the fields you need here. So in order to add and remove fields, click on please choose, and then you'll find all of the attributes. And just like the last time, I would recommend removing the stuff that you don't need first. So I don't need to know the created by, which is, in my case, it's logged under system info. I don't need the sales rep either. I don't care about the category. And then I would add, things like the address, the business phone, maintenance contract expiry. That's kind of crucial. And then you can resize these fields as well. And so yeah, that's pretty much it. And then if you go back, it'll immediately reflect. And so that's pretty useful. One thing that somebody brought up in the questions that is actually kind of interesting is, let's say that you deleted some fields. How do I get those back, right? I mentioned that they're not permanently deleted; they're just hidden. If you want to get those fields back, sorry to go back, but if you go to the settings, go to customize app, master layout, and you go to the hierarchy. I don't know how to pronounce that. Hierarchical view, maybe. You'll see all the fields that you disabled, and you can just turn them on. So that's one way that you can find those fields again. So yeah, nothing is lost. You'll always have a reference to that. Okay, the last thing we'll take a look at configuring are these views. And this is a huge culprit of confusion. Just because you see all of these and you're like, what do I look at? What is necessary? It just has some subconscious effect on a lot of users. And so you want to make sure that those are relevant. So go to the settings, click on Customize App, go to Views. And here, you'll see all of those views that have been enabled by default. And I would just clear everything that you don't need. And to me, that's almost everything. So bounced, to follow up, I'm actually going to create my own follow-up list. So I'm going to remove that. Directory, category, market. Yeah, just spend a few seconds to clear things out. My views is actually super important. So keep that. Shared views is also potentially useful. So hold on to those two views. And now, once you cleared it, you'll see that it's a little simpler to it just isn't as overwhelming, the screen. But the question is, going back to our use case, what are some views that we need? Well, one thing that I mentioned is I need to be able to follow up. with the client 40 days before their contract expires. And so it would help to see a list of all of the accounts that are about to expire. And so to do that, to create that particular view, you go to More and then Settings. Then click on Customize App and then go back to Views. And here we're going to create a new one. We'll give it a title. Let's call this Contracts Nearing Expiration. And I just copy and paste because I'm lazy. Now, this criteria is immediately going to throw some folks off if you haven't seen this before, but don't be too worried about it. Really, the most important thing is you just want to find the criteria that you want to build a view around, right? So you find the attribute first. And for us, we want to create a view based on the maintenance contact expiry. So we can add that. And then you're just adding the condition. So if the expiry date is in the next 30, or I think I said 45, so 45 days, that account needs to show up in this list. And that's pretty much it. So, and you can add additional conditions. Let's say that there's separate two different types of conditions. So either it's in the next 45 days or it's in the last 20 days. So not only do I want to reach out to customers that are about to expire, but maybe the ones that also already expired. So if you want to do that, you can add a new group of conditions, make sure that it's enabled to OR, and then you find the contract expiry. And then here you can say if it's in the last, and then pick an additional criteria, right? So that's how you build a view. You click Create, and that's going to show up as a new view here. So that's a basic overview of how these fields can be configured, how you can customize this to be a little more relevant to your team. Does anyone have any questions about this? So yeah, about any of the configuration that we walked through. Okay, so one of the questions is, what is the difference between a condition group and a condition set? And the difference is a condition set, well, okay. Basically, you have a group of conditions. So a group of conditions are just multiple conditions that you can add together. And so you can have many groups of conditions. But then sometimes you have sets of groups, right? So I'm not able to think of a use case off the top of my head, but a set is really only useful for if you have a really, really complex workflow. So my recommendation is just ignore it for now. And when you do realize that you need it, you'll almost certainly figure it out. That's kind of how I learned as well. It didn't make sense to me initially, and then I had a customer who brought up a scenario that definitely needed it, and then I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. So I would just ignore sets. I would just work within groups at a max. So another question was, is the performance of the system affected if you have a lot of fields? And that's partially true, but you have to really hit a high number. So if you reach like 1,000 custom fields, that's when you'll start to see the performance being affected. So I think I've only seen that once during my time at Apptivo, and it was kind of insane. And we had to go in and reset the whole thing, because if ease of use was their priority, they definitely did not accomplish that. So you know, if you're worried about having a lot of fields, you probably shouldn't have that many fields, to be fair. Does Apptivo have a step-by-step of how to use the system? We do. There's a starter guide that we can share with you, and one of my colleagues may be able to link that to you. And Someone also mentioned that I'm moving a little too fast. I'm sorry about that. We have quite a bit to cover. I'll try to maybe explain things in greater detail. But if you're curious about any of what I walked through, how to configure the layout, how to create these lists and these views, there's a dedicated video on YouTube that walks through this. So if you feel like you've kind of lost the you know got lost in how to do it, don't worry about that. I think the most important thing for you to keep in mind is just that um, key information need to be at the top. Delete anything that's unnecessary, and create a section at the bottom for any data that you're not sure about but could be relevant in the future. So just keep the sort of high level concepts in mind, and I think that'll take you a long way. So the other process that I wanted to implement in our time together is in the Opportunities app, this workflow here. And it's pretty identical in terms of how you do it. You go into the Opportunities app, and the first thing you want to do as soon as you go to Opportunities is you go to the settings, click on Opportunities, go to Sales Stages, and you update this process to match your workflow. So all I did was, there were some default stages. I just went into them, I clicked on More Details here, and I renamed the stage. And then there's some instances like these ones right here, I didn't need them, so I just disabled them. So just make sure that your set of opportunities, set of stages, is not more than 4 or 3. Really, just keep it pretty simple, right? And then in the same way that you could customize the customers app, you can go in here and configure the layout of the opportunities. And we'll just really quickly go through that. So all you have to do is, again, I don't need that section. Throw in a new section at the bottom for system info. Close these fields because you don't want users to see them when they open up the record, and then put some information in here. Last contact is crucial. I would put last contact at the very top, which we'll get to. I will need the follow-up description as well, so I'll put that down there. I don't need campaign. I don't need next step really. That's usually by the stage. So yeah, just be kind of wanton about it. Just don't worry about losing data. It's always available to you. And then always go back to your workflow to understand what you need. So I need an attachment field. I need a timeline, like a date field for the expiry. So I would go back to my layout, create a date field. Actually, I don't need to create a date field. This close date, it's a mandatory field, so you have to enter something in. So if you have some kind of a date field, I would just recommend using this. So submission end date and close date, they're pretty similar. So I would just use it for that, submission due date. If you want to track separate things, though, if you want to track the decision date and the submission date, if you want to track separate things, of course, you can add new date fields and stuff. Okay, and so that's pretty much how I would configure it. So it took a couple of seconds really, right? Once you get the hang of it, it becomes pretty easy. And then I'm not going to go through creating the views and the tables, but I hope you got an idea of how to do it based on previous conversations. Sorry, I got sidetracked, but when we looked at the company's app. Okay. So we talked a little bit about configuring the system and all the things you can do to change the layout. Let's spend, so just in summary, and I'm going to send the slide deck to you so you'll have this with you, but you just keep in mind that you want to remove unnecessary data, keep key information at the top, don't have too many sections, and create that one section at the bottom. And another thing that's kind of useful is if you group relevant data. So in the customer record, I put the phone number, email, and address next to each other. In the opportunity, I put the submission date, and I forgot to add the RFP attachment, but those were together. So all of those, so that's another way. It's a nuanced effect, but it has a huge impact on the way that the system appears. There's a few other things that I would recommend removing. So a lot of the respondents in this call had mentioned that you were actually interested in using more than the CRM, quotes, invoices, and I think there's email marketing. There's all these other apps. And the benefit of Apptivo is all these apps can be connected. So let's say that you want to send a quote to a client. You can go into an opportunity, you can click on convert and go to an estimate, right? So that's really handy because it takes all the information you've been gathering and transfers it over to the estimate. But you also have control over what options you have in this list. And it may not seem like a big deal, but you do want to remove anything that the team won't need. Just because a lot of times people will get lost in, wait, am I supposed to do this or that? Maybe they'll misclick and go somewhere else and they have to go back and they'll lose a lot of time there. So it just makes sense to remove things. So just clear anything that doesn't make sense. So if I go to the settings, click on opportunities and click on conversion, you'll see all of the options that are possible. The last webinar we we talked a little bit about custom conversions, so you can actually build your own conversions if you want. But for today, just delete the ones that aren't necessary. Another thing that is actually very important to think about are these collaboration tabs on the top. A lot of these are useful. You can attach documents, you can add notes, emails can be tracked, call logs, tasks, follow-up reminders, calendar events. These are all potentially useful, but sometimes they just aren't necessary for your use case. So let's say, for example, you have in this case, the project managers, they don't really make a lot of follow-up calls. They may want to add notes for updates, but they don't need to log calls. And they will need tasks, but they really don't need follow-up reminders. So if you decide that some of these aren't relevant, all you have to do is go to the name on the top, go to business settings, click on collaboration, and here you can just turn off the ones that you don't need. So so you can just turn them off here. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we talked about how to remove applications as well. So that's and there's so much more you can remove. So if you look at the system and you say, hey, there's this button that I don't need, reach out to us. You have chats available to you. Ask us, and we'll probably have a guide that we can share with you. Now, when you're setting up a user, the first thing that, and I won't have time to really talk about how to do, limit the visibility and clear actions that aren't relevant, like, preventing them from bulk deleting. But there are tutorials available. So just be sure to check those out. The one thing that a lot of folks forget to do is set an appropriate homepage. So as I mentioned earlier, when you log into Apptivo for the first time, you'll see this agenda, but a lot of times this really isn't relevant. Sometimes, as in my case, I want to go straight to opportunities. And in the opportunities app, yeah, so I want to go straight into this one. If you want to change which application is your homepage, just go to the Employees app. And this is where the Employees app is where you're going to be able to configure all the user settings and privileges. So if I want to control my homepage, and my account is 360 Engineering, I would go to More Details and scroll to the bottom. And under Enabled Apps, I can choose what the default app is here. So I can say that the first thing I want to see is opportunities. And if you're setting up the system for a different user, you definitely want to set up a home page for them that is relevant to them. So choose the application they need. Maybe Jan on our team is on the account management side. So the first thing she should look at is the company's app. And you can also set up her navigation before she even goes into the system. So you can say that it should be similar to yours, set up the contacts, companies, opportunities, and that's pretty much it. So I would recommend doing that as well, just so that they can see this as soon as they get a chance. So someone had asked if we're recording this. We are, and we'll share this with you after the call. Okay, so there's more to talk about as far as user settings, and to be honest, I think this is something that we probably should have a webinar on, so I'll be sure to coordinate that. But the other thing that I really wanted to get to were these tools that will make things easier. And the first thing are system messages. And this is something that, in my experience, I've actually never seen, or I have seen a few users use it, but it's not very popular. If you go to any application, there's this section at the bottom called Useful Links. And you can create links and resources for your users to use that are immediately accessible. And this is, unbelievably helpful because let's say that they're not sure how to update an opportunity, you can create a note that'll help them. So maybe after training, you just tell them, hey, if you're not sure about how to do something, you're most likely going to find them in these quick links. So I would recommend taking advantage of this. And if you want to do this, you just go to the settings, and there's quick links on the top here, and you just click add, and you can either choose to link to a different guide. So there's actually this video on YouTube that I always share to folks who are adding new users. So basic navigation, Apptivo, beginner's guide. This is a really great tool for someone to just go through and look at how to navigate through all the components. And so you can just add that URL here. And so there's a question that was just asked, which app is collaborative and live and best for meeting notes? So if you're just logging meeting notes, actually, let me just finish this thought here. So this is just going to be basic navigation tutorial. So I think the best way to add meeting notes is directly in the companies. So if you go to a customer record and you click on a customer, you have the option of just adding notes here. And I would recommend adding meeting notes directly to this. But if it's a part of a larger project, you're welcome to use the project management application. But okay, so that's one tool. Those quick links. It's not system messages, it's quick links. But anyways, the other thing, and this is the most important thing, I mentioned earlier that planning ahead is important, and it is, but the most important thing you can do is integrate your email and calendar to Apptivo. So just a few things to remember: if you're using G Suite or Office 365, it's automatic. You can set up an integration with your calendar, your emails, the storage solution, Google Drive or OneDrive, contacts. There's a lot of things, but just make sure to connect these two things, the email and the calendar. And there's there's just a variety of it's a pretty easy process to set up the email integration. If you're not sure how to do it, just while you're in Apptivo, just open up the chat window and ask us, and we can send over a guide on how to do that. But that is super essential. The email integration works a couple of ways. One way to do it is for it to be fully automated. And this is going to be useful if the person does a lot of emailing that needs to be logged in the CRM. You can set it up so that any email they send from Apptivo syncs with the sent folder in Gmail, and any responses that they have and all the conversations in Gmail will automatically sync to Apptivo, and it'll recognize the contact name based on the email address and link it automatically to that account. So that's super important. I mean, if you're thinking about ease of use, if you do that one thing, it'll have a massive impact. The other thing is this VoIP integrations. If you're using RingCentral or Asterisk or Vonage, we have existing integrations that allow you to go to any phone number in the system, click on that phone number. There's usually like a little icon next to it. You click on it and it'll make the call from Apptivo. And that can save a lot of time because it automatically logs the call after you hang up. And we're actually working on a built-in contact center that allows you to make calls from Apptivo. So be on the lookout for any updates on that. That's we're pretty excited about that feature, and it'll make things dramatically easier for a lot of users. So that's more on the VoIP solution. The mobile app, gosh, I mean, everything that we've talked about so far, updating opportunities, adding notes, tracking stages, making calls, everything can be done from the mobile app. We have a lot of users that are pretty consistent users of Apptivo that almost entirely use the mobile app, and it makes things so much easier. Sorry. So it's accessible on both Android and iOS, tablet and phone. So be sure to look at installing that and making sure that your users have access to that and know how to use it. It's super easy to use. And finally, the newest addition is this Gmail add-in. And this is actually also pretty neat. So give me 1 second here. I know we're running short on time, but I really want to make a point of this. So let me go to an email and take a look at how this is done. So I'm going to walk through this in Gmail, but the Outlook add-in is also available. So if you're using Outlook, there's a separate guide or resource that I can share with you. If you're in your Gmail, on the right here, you just click on the plus for Get Add-ons, then search for Apptivo, and you'll see Apptivo for Gmail. Just install that, continue, go through all the permissions and everything, allow. And what that does is it creates this sidebar in Apptivo. So when you go into an email, actually, I think you'll have to sign in first, huh? Yeah, oh, actually, I forgot. I already signed in for this one. But if you click on a contact, it'll show you if the contact exists in the CRM, it'll show you that information. You can click on it to jump into Apptivo. You can edit the contact information from here. If the person isn't in the CRM, you have the option of creating a new contact. So let's see here. Let's click on home. Yeah, you'll see something like this. And you'll have the option of creating a new opportunity. Let's say that I got an email with an RFP attachment. I can, from here, go in and create an opportunity. So if your team is really familiar with the email and you want them to continue using Apptivo, their email system, but still have updates to the opportunities and to the CRM, this add-on is super important. And some folks actually don't want to sync all their emails, so this gives you the option of associating emails on a one-off basis. So that's another really handy guide.